LeBron sat at his kitchen table, the mug of coffee in his hand, steam rising lazily in the quiet morning. The house was still, the only sounds coming from the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of birds outside. He wasn't expecting any mail, so when the letter arrived, plain, unmarked, he was immediately intrigued. It wasn't a bill, nor a package from a sponsor. Just an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, with his name written in bold, careful handwriting on the front. His fingers hesitated for a moment, a strange twinge of unease prickling at the back of his neck. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but somehow it felt familiar. He tore it open slowly, as if it might unravel something deeper than just words. Inside, the letter was crisp, folded neatly in half, and carried a certain weight. He unfolded it, his gaze sweeping across the first few lines. LeBron, I know this is unexpected, but I have much to explain. You may not remember me, but I am your father. And you need to know the truth. LeBron's heart skipped a beat. His father. He hadn't seen him in years, hadn't even known where to look. His mind raced, memories from childhood flashing by in a blur. His father had left when he was just a boy, disappeared without explanation. His mother never spoke much about it. She had always carried an air of quiet grief when it came to his father, but she never let it show too much. The letter continued, explaining that there was a family secret, a legacy he had inherited. The words spilled out quickly, each sentence a jolt to his system. His father had been part of something larger, something that stretched back in time, and now, it was LeBron's turn to uncover it. He paused, feeling the weight of the words, the gravity of what they meant. For a moment, he felt suspended between the past he'd left behind and a future that was now tangled with mysteries he hadn't expected. LeBron's fingers gripped the letter tighter, the paper crinkling beneath his touch. There were no return addresses, no contact details, only an address far from where he lived, in a town he didn't recognize. His heart thudded in his chest, the silence of the room suddenly deafening. What was he supposed to do with this? His mind raced. Should he go? What would he find? What would it mean for his life? The questions swirled, each one louder than the last. But one thing was clear, he couldn't ignore it. He had to know the truth. Setting the letter down on the table, LeBron took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. He was about to step into a past he had never fully known. And there was no turning back now. LeBron sat alone in his private study, the room bathed in the soft light of a desk lamp. The letter was in front of him again, the words now etched into his mind. He had read it over and over, trying to grasp its meaning, but the shock hadn't fully worn off. A father he never knew. A legacy. A family secret. He picked up the letter once more, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar words. His father's voice felt so close, so tangible, despite the years of silence. Each sentence seemed to weigh heavier than the last. You have inherited more than just my name. There is a legacy I left behind, one tied to our family's past. You are the only one who can finish what I started. There is an address for you, please find me. LeBron felt his stomach twist. A legacy? What did that mean? And why had his father waited until now to reach out? As he stared at the words, the reality began to settle in. His father had known about him all along, had perhaps been keeping tabs, waiting for the right time. But why now? What had changed? A small slip of paper had fallen out of the envelope when he opened it, a map with an address scrawled in the corner. The place was miles away, in a town he didn't recognize, far from the life he had built for himself. He wondered if his father had planned all of this. Was it all part of a grand design? LeBron placed the map on the table, studying it carefully. He was caught between the man he had become and the child who had been abandoned. The questions piled up, but there was one that stuck with him, gnawing at his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Why didn't my father want to be in my life? He closed his eyes, trying to push away the pain of the past, the abandonment. His father had left, disappeared, without a word. LeBron had carried that void his whole life. But now, it seemed, his father wanted to make up for lost time. Or did he? The weight of the decision felt immense. He could throw the letter away, pretend it never came, continue his life as it was. But the pull of the mystery, the unanswered questions, drew him in. LeBron took a deep breath, the decision made. The journey wasn't going to be easy, but there was no other choice now. He had to go. He had to see for himself. LeBron stood in his bedroom, staring at an open suitcase on the bed. The contents were sparse: clothes, toiletries, a few personal items, but the weight of what it represented felt heavy. This wasn't just about packing for a trip. It was about stepping into a past that had been waiting for him, hidden in the shadows for years. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the tension coil tighter with each passing second. He hadn't expected to be here, hadn't expected this moment to arrive. For years he had convinced himself that his father's absence was a non-issue, something to bury under the surface. His mother had done her best to shield him from the pain, but now, everything was unraveling. The letter had cracked open something deep inside him. He thought about the life he had built, the basketball career, the people who depended on him. He had achieved so much, but in the back of his mind, there was always a question: what if there was more? The idea of reconnecting with his father, after all these years, was both exhilarating and terrifying. What would he find? Would it bring peace, or would it dredge up old wounds? He glanced at the clock. Time was running out, and the plane ticket was non-refundable. He had already made the call, booked the flight, and now there was no turning back. A flash of memory flickered across his mind, the day his father left. His mother's quiet tears, his own confusion. He had been so young then, just a boy who didn't understand. And now, all these years later, he was still that boy, searching for something he couldn't define. LeBron sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase. His fingers traced the edge of a folded shirt, but his mind was elsewhere. He was torn between the weight of the past and the pull of the unknown future. Could he handle whatever truth he might find? Would it shatter the identity he had built, or would it complete him? He closed the suitcase with a snap, making a decision in that single moment. He would go. Taking one last look around the room, he stood up and walked toward the door. There was no more room for hesitation. The journey was waiting, and for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face it. LeBron's car rumbled down the two-lane highway, the scenery slowly changing from bustling city streets to the quiet, rolling hills of small-town America. He had been driving for hours, lost in thought, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a nervous energy he hadn't expected. The letter had led him here, this sleepy town he had never heard of, and now, he wasn't sure what he was looking for. The town seemed to whisper, with its small, unassuming buildings and the soft sound of wind rustling through trees. It wasn't much, just a quiet place with familiar, worn-in comfort. He pulled into a diner on the corner, a neon sign flickering overhead. It seemed like the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's name, where the past was just as alive as the present. LeBron stepped out of his car, stretching his legs as he walked into the diner. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon hit him instantly, and for a moment, he felt at home in the hum of conversation and clinking silverware. A waitress, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and kind eyes, greeted him with a smile. She showed him to a booth near the window, and LeBron slid into the seat, his mind still preoccupied with the journey ahead. He ordered a coffee, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the table. The town felt quiet, almost frozen in time, and he couldn't shake the sense that something was waiting for him here. But what? As he stared out the window, lost in his thoughts, an elderly woman at the counter caught his attention. She was leaning over a mug of tea, her gnarled fingers tracing the edge of the cup as she watched him with sharp, knowing eyes. She had the kind of presence that made you feel as though she'd seen everything, understood everything, and wasn't afraid to share it. LeBron felt a strange pull toward her, like she knew something he didn't. He hesitated for a moment, but something told him this was the chance he'd been waiting for. He stood up, walking toward her with the kind of uncertainty that only came with stepping into the unknown. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice tinged with hesitation. I couldn't help but notice you looking at me. I'm new here. Actually, I'm looking for someone. The woman looked up, her eyes softening with a knowing smile. I figured you might be. LeBron was taken aback by her response. You know who I'm looking for? She nodded slowly, taking a sip of her tea. You're looking for your father, aren't you? The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken, as if she had known long before he ever arrived. He couldn't believe it. How did you? You've got that look, she said with a smile that almost felt like a secret. Your father was a man who left a mark on this town. He did a lot of good, but he also left a lot of people wondering about him. LeBron's heart pounded. What do you mean? She leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant. Your father, he wasn't just some man passing through. He built something here, something lasting. But he didn't want anyone to know too much about him. He had reasons, things he had to hide. LeBron felt his breath catch. What kind of reasons? She paused, considering her words carefully. That's a story for another time. But I can tell you this, your father cared about this town, and he cared about you. I'm sure of it. The woman smiled warmly, then added, You'll find more answers if you dig deep enough. But be careful, sometimes, the past isn't something we're ready to face. LeBron nodded slowly, taking in her words. There was something both comforting and unsettling about her cryptic nature. But she had given him something, an entry point, a glimpse into the mystery he was beginning to unravel. With a brief thank you, LeBron made his way back to the booth, the weight of her words settling into his mind. He couldn't help but wonder what else lay hidden in this quiet town. The answers were here somewhere. He just had to keep searching. The next morning, LeBron found himself in the town's small library, the dusty smell of old books filling the air as he walked between the narrow aisles. He had decided to take the woman's advice, to dig deeper, and the library seemed like a good place to start. The staff was friendly enough, but LeBron didn't need much more than a few whispers from the librarian to point him in the right direction. He was led to a back room, one filled with yellowing newspapers and historical records. As LeBron scanned the shelves, one article caught his eye. It was an old newspaper clipping from decades ago, the date at the top of the page marking a time when his father could have been in the town. He pulled the article free from the stack and read aloud, almost to himself. Local philanthropist found dead under mysterious circumstances. Known for his generosity, Jackson Hollis was the head of several key charity projects aimed at improving the local community. His passing has left many in the town reeling, with questions still unanswered about his personal life and his hidden connections. LeBron's heart raced. Jackson Hollis. His father. The article spoke of his father's reputation, his charity work, his dedication to the town, but there was something off. The tone of the article hinted at unfinished business, questions left lingering. But what were the hidden connections? And why had no one ever spoken of it? LeBron flipped through more pages, hoping for more clues, but found only a handful of articles mentioning his father's name. It seemed like he had lived a quiet, almost secretive life. The deeper LeBron dug, the more he realized that the man he was seeking wasn't just a philanthropist. He was a ghost, a figure shrouded in mystery. His hands shook slightly as he gathered the articles. A sense of dread mixed with curiosity surged within him. He had found his first clue, but it only raised more questions. What had his father been involved in? What had he hidden from everyone, including him? LeBron left the library with the papers tucked under his arm, his mind swirling with possibilities. The road ahead was becoming clearer, but every step forward only seemed to bring him deeper into a web of secrets he wasn't prepared for. But he had to continue. He had to know. LeBron arrived at the rundown neighborhood late in the afternoon, the sky painted in hues of amber and gold. The community center was smaller than he had imagined, tucked away between rows of old brick buildings that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls, and the faded signs hanging above the doors whispered of years gone by, of promises made and forgotten. But despite its wear, there was a certain energy that hummed in the air, something that spoke of life and resilience. He parked his car and stepped out, taking in the sight. A group of volunteers were scattered across the lawn, painting, picking up trash, and organizing donations. It was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone, a place where people worked together to rebuild what had been torn down. LeBron approached a middle-aged man with a clipboard, who was directing a group of teenagers sorting through boxes of supplies. The man looked up, his eyes scanning LeBron briefly before his face softened in recognition. "You must be LeBron," the man said with a smile, extending his hand. "I heard you were coming. Glad you made it." LeBron shook his hand, still uncertain about how much he could trust this place. "I'm looking for some answers," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm here because of my father. He helped start this place, didn't he?" The man's face faltered for a brief moment, and then he nodded slowly. "Jackson Hollis. Yeah, he was one of the first to step in when things started going downhill here. He believed in this community, believed in the people, the kids, the families. He put a lot into this place." LeBron's heart sank a little. Every word the man spoke made his father seem more real, more alive in a way that he had never experienced before. The idea that his father had been here, giving himself to the very people LeBron now saw before him, felt like a bridge he could cross. The man, sensing the weight of the moment, gestured toward the community center. "Come on in. You'll see what I mean. You need to see it for yourself. I'm sure your father would want you to." LeBron followed him through the worn front doors into the heart of the building. Inside, the air was filled with the sound of laughter, the clatter of activity. It was a small gymnasium, with a few basketball hoops hanging loosely from the ceiling and a worn-out wooden floor. But there were kids here, kids who were laughing, playing, and working together. This place was far from perfect, but it was alive. And that was something. As they walked through the space, LeBron noticed walls adorned with photos and framed newspaper clippings, some with his father's face on them, some with names he didn't recognize. A local mural of sorts, piecing together a history of support, sacrifice, and dedication. "This place was everything to your dad," the man said, his voice growing more reflective. "He gave us more than just money or resources. He gave his time. He gave his heart. He kept us going when the rest of the world had forgotten about us. It's because of him that we're still here." LeBron stood in front of a bulletin board covered with handwritten thank you notes from kids, families, and community members, all signed with words of gratitude. A large photo of his father hung in the center of the board, surrounded by a sea of smiling faces. The image of Jackson Hollis wasn't just a businessman or philanthropist, it was of a man who had truly cared, a man who had done more than just give money. He had given hope. LeBron felt a surge of emotions he hadn't expected: pride, guilt, loss, and something else, a strange longing. This is what he did?" LeBron asked, his voice quiet. The man nodded. "This and more. Your father left behind a legacy of helping people. He never wanted the credit, never wanted the spotlight. But I can tell you this, what he did here, what he built, was real. And it's still going, thanks to people like you. People who care." LeBron's mind swirled. This was the man he had been searching for, a man whose life had been more than just a shadow of his absence. It was a life filled with purpose, one that had touched people's hearts in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. And yet, he still didn't know everything. He still didn't know why his father had left, why he had kept his distance. But as he stood in that room, watching the kids play and seeing the way the volunteers worked together, LeBron felt something stir inside him, something that felt like an answer, or at least the start of one. The day had ended, and LeBron found himself alone on a bench outside the community center, staring at the sunset as the sky darkened into hues of purple and orange. The quiet, peaceful scene seemed like the calm before a storm, and LeBron couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. His father's legacy was real, undeniable, but what was the cost? What had Jackson Hollis left behind? And why had he kept his distance for all those years? Just then, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code indicated it was local. LeBron hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? A voice on the other end was low and urgent. LeBron? This is Terry Matthews. I was your father's business partner. LeBron's pulse quickened. Business partner? Yes, Terry said, his voice strained. Listen, I'm not sure how to say this, but there's someone looking for you. Someone who's got an interest in your father's affairs, and not the kind that's friendly. You need to be careful. It's about the foundation, about the assets he left behind. LeBron stood up, the weight of the conversation sinking in. What do you mean? Who's after me? I can't say over the phone, but I've been watching things. Trust me, there's a lot you don't know. Your father didn't just build that place for good reasons. People want what he left behind. And they'll do anything to get it. LeBron's mind raced, a chill creeping over him. What had his father been involved in? What kind of trouble had he left for LeBron to pick up? Meet me tomorrow, Terry continued. I'll tell you everything, but you have to be careful. This isn't just about charity work anymore. The line went dead, and LeBron stared at the phone in his hand, feeling the weight of the warning settle in. The answers were getting closer, but so was danger. LeBron arrived at the dilapidated building where Terry had asked him to meet, a place that seemed more like a forgotten warehouse than a safe spot for a conversation. The area was dim, shadows stretching long across the cracked pavement. His heart pounded as he approached, the air thick with the weight of uncertainty. The door creaked open, revealing a cluttered interior, its walls lined with dusty shelves filled with old files and crates. The smell of stale air mixed with the faint scent of something musty. Terry? LeBron called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. A figure appeared from the shadows, Terry Matthews, his face worn and gaunt, eyes glinting with a mixture of anxiety and urgency. He gestured for LeBron to follow him deeper into the building. Without a word, they moved to a back office, where a single desk sat covered in stacks of paperwork and documents. Terry closed the door behind them, his face drawn tight with worry. You don't know the full story, Terry began, his voice low. Your father, he didn't just run charity foundations. He got mixed up in something much bigger. People with power, people who used his goodwill to cover up darker things. LeBron felt a cold rush through him. What do you mean? What kind of things? Terry paused, taking a deep breath. Your father wasn't just funding community centers and projects. He was helping to launder money, clean up dirty investments. That's how the people he was working with kept him around. They didn't care about his charities. They just wanted him as a front, someone with a clean image to mask their dealings. LeBron's mind raced. So, he was involved in criminal activities? Not exactly, Terry said, shaking his head. He thought he could control it, thought he was doing good by keeping things quiet. But once the money started flowing, once the people he was working with started pushing for more, it got out of hand. And the worst part? He had to keep you in the dark. If he'd ever told you the truth, you'd have been at risk. So he cut ties with everyone, left everything behind, trying to protect you. LeBron felt a whirlwind of emotions crash over him, betrayal, confusion, and fear. His father had kept him from the truth to protect him, but the lie had hurt just as much. Terry handed him a file. This is everything, proof of what was going on. I've kept it hidden for years, hoping to protect you and your father's memory. But now you have to decide. You can expose all of this, put it out into the light, or you can let it stay buried. LeBron stared at the file, his hands trembling. The weight of the decision settled on his shoulders. There was no easy way out. But he had to know. He had to understand who his father really was. The next morning, LeBron stood outside a tall, imposing building in the center of town. The sunlight reflected off the windows, giving the structure an almost gleaming, untouchable quality. He felt the tension in his chest tighten as he stared up at the building. This was where everything would change. Inside, Terry had arranged a meeting with one of his father's old associates, a man named Victor Greaves. According to Terry, Victor was one of the key players in the darker side of the business, the side LeBron had never known existed. LeBron walked through the grand lobby and made his way up the elevator to a small office at the top of the building. When the door opened, he found himself face to face with Victor, a man in his late 50s, sharply dressed, with a hard edge to his eyes that instantly put LeBron on guard. "You must be LeBron," Victor said, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone of something more sinister. "Your father spoke highly of you." LeBron didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a step forward and placed the file on the table between them. "I know what you were involved in," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet anger. "I know about the money laundering, about the people you used my father for. And I know that he tried to protect me from the truth." Victor's eyes flickered to the file, then back to LeBron. There was no surprise in his gaze, just an air of resignation. "Jackson didn't want you to be involved in this world, but it was too late for him. Once he was in, there was no getting out. He tried to keep it clean, tried to use the community projects to shield you. But power, money, and greed, they don't stay hidden for long." LeBron felt his fists clench at his sides. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know what was really happening? My whole life, was it just a lie?" Victor leaned back in his chair, his face hardening. "Your father did what he could. But you can't erase the past. You can't rewrite history, LeBron. It's bigger than any one person. It's bigger than your father ever realized." LeBron swallowed hard, his emotions raging within him. "I won't let this go. I won't let his name be tied to this anymore." Victor laughed, the sound cold and detached. "You think you can erase it? You think you can just walk away from all of this? The people we worked with, they're not the forgiving type. They'll come for you, too. You're already in it, whether you want to be or not." LeBron's gaze hardened, and he stood up, the weight of his father's decisions pressing down on him. "Then let them come. But I'm not backing down. Not anymore." He turned and walked out of the office, the door slamming behind him, his heart racing with the knowledge that his life had just shifted once again. The truth was out. But now, there were no more easy choices. Only the fight ahead. Days passed since his confrontation with Victor, and the weight of everything he had uncovered began to settle into his bones. LeBron returned to the community center, the place where his father had left his mark. But now, everything felt different. The bright walls and laughter didn't feel like a safe haven anymore. They felt like a reminder of what had been lost, of the truth that had been hidden for so long. But LeBron knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let his father's legacy be defined by the darkness that had tainted it. He couldn't erase the past, but he could change its meaning. He could make it something that wasn't just about money or secrecy, but about the good his father had done in the lives of so many. LeBron stood in the gymnasium, surrounded by the very kids who had benefited from the community his father had helped build. He saw their faces, the hope in their eyes, the future they were fighting for. They didn't know the full story of Jackson Hollis, but they knew one thing: their lives were better because of him. He turned to the group of volunteers, including Terry, who had been there through everything. "I don't have all the answers," LeBron said, his voice carrying the weight of the journey he had just completed. "But I know this place matters. And I'm going to make sure it continues to matter. We'll keep fighting for the community. My father may have had his flaws, but he built something worth protecting. And I'll protect it. I'll make sure the truth, whatever it is, doesn't change that." The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Then, slowly, people began to nod, to step forward and offer their support. LeBron wasn't alone in this fight. He had found something worth fighting for. And for the first time, he felt like he was stepping into the man his father had always hoped he could be. The journey was far from over, but LeBron had finally found his place, his purpose. And with that, he could move forward, leaving the past behind while carrying its lessons with him.